Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. Your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Reach out to me directly, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. Today, we're discussing the Rolex Oyster Perpetual GMT-Master II 126755 SARU. Red gold, sapphires, rubies, and diamonds. This is a model that was sold in 2019 and measures 40 millimeters in diameter by 12 millimeters thick by 48 millimeters lug-to-lug, and if you include the solid end links of the bracelet, is 51 millimeters across the wrist with a 20 millimeter spacing between the lugs. Pop open the double locking Oyster clasp and throw it on the wrist. This is a watch that has presence, sometimes known as the Patriot combination, red, white, and blue, of course. The watch has more grandeur in its red gold variant than in the more commonly cited and online depicted white gold model. This is something special. You can almost feel the heat coming off of this watch. It's an easy watch to wear on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. In spite of its presence, it's not an onerous size. The mass is impressive. You can really feel the heft of this watch on the wrist, but you can also see that it's not very thick. Being only 12 millimeters thick, it will slide easily underneath a dress cuff for the rare times when this watch requires discretion. Taking a quick look at the hardware, the Oyster bracelet here is finished upscale with polished centers, satin finished outers, polished outer faces, and as ever with the Oyster removable links fixed by screws. The clasp, as you can see, is a double locker. There's a beak and a hook internally, and you can see this lift lock system latches as you compress it. You actually have to lift it to unlock it. It's not a friction fit system. Once you lock it down, there's a second lock. As you can see, some of the original packing stickers with this watch still on the clasp, so condition is outstanding. Straight through polished top spline, polished faces, flanked by satin, and then inside the clasp, a couple of different measures of adjustment. One is the 5 millimeter Easy Link system, allowing you to take in or out 5 millimeters, the equivalent of removing one sizable link. And then you can see that there are 3 divots with little tracks to help you lead the base of the bracelet into those divots, so you can use your strap tool to change the anchoring point 3 different ways inside the clasp for fine-tuning the fit. Rolling over to the case, you can see this is the super case. We're well into that era, and with the GMT, that era started earlier than any other Rolex model line back in 2005. The case flank is all of high polish, and then the lugs, they're squared off and they're chunky. They're massive and prominent as with the other super cases, but here Rolex does something with all that real estate with a beautiful setting of brilliant cut diamonds. These are diamond paved lugs. You can also see that there are diamond paved crown guard structures. A trip lock crown in red gold, screw down, 100 meters water resistant, and then we get to that Patriot bezel, red, white, and blue. Now Rolex matches all of these gems for color and clarity, so there's no discernible gradient between the same color of gemstone. All of these are baguette cut, and as you can see, the setting is almost invisible as you have the inner and outer rims of the bezel, but nothing in between apparently holding the gems in. If you want a handmade Rolex in this day and age, you really only have one choice, and it's the gem set models. Rolex has automated just about everything today except for gem setting. So this is a handmade watch from the Prince of Geneva. On the dial, you can see that the dial features red gold indices as well as hands applied. The red gold not just matching the warmth of the case, but also resisting tarnish and oxidation over time. We know we're looking at a post-2018 Rolex model debut because it has a crown between Swiss and made down at 6 o'clock, and the dial base itself is black lacquer and lustrous. The watch, of course, is a GMT Master II, which means you do have the ability to set 2 independent time zones on the dial. One is the local time, and you can see how I'm able to move that local time, even jump the date forward and backwards without it interfering with the timekeeping functions of the second time zone, the seconds, or the minute. But then if I pull the crown out all the way, hacking or stop seconds is engaged, and I can set everything in sync. There is a 24-hour hand. The triangular index makes 1 circuit of the dial per day, and that is your reference time zone, the time zone where you are not. Well, the watch does lose some of its GMT functionality via the bezel because the bezel does not feature 24 calibrations. Nevertheless, it is clear where the individual hours would be placed, so you can still approximate, and assuming you have familiarity with the GMT, you can still gauge 3 time zones temporarily using that bezel. Underneath the case back, which is solid, you have the caliber 3285. Bidirectional automatic winding, 70-hour power reserve. It features the stop seconds, the 12 and 24-hour independent time zones, Rolex chronometer certifies the movement, then cases it up and retests in 6 positions rather than the original 5. And Rolex will not let the watch leave the factory unless it's keeping time to plus or minus 2 seconds a day, which is far better than the COSC percentage-wise, and it is the basis for this terminology, superlative chronometer on the dial. The watch beats away at 8 beats per second. It has a full balance bridge with a free-sprung index for shock tolerance. Also in the interests of shock tolerance, compared to the previous GMT-Master IIs, instead of a jeweled staff for the winding system, we have a rotor bearing, making the winding system more shock tolerant in this latest generation of GMT. There's also an overcoil hairspring made by hand with a brigade profile that allows the watch to keep excellent time in any orientation with respect to gravity, and that hairspring is manufactured from a blue oxidized niobium zirconium alloy, highly anti-magnetic. Rolex calls that parachrom blue. It is a 31 joule movement, and because it is now all Rolex is even building the shock protection in this generation of the GMT Master movement. It uses its own Paraflex system rather than the previous KIF. All of that, of course, inside a package for the ages. When it was first launched as a tool for Pan Am pilots in the mid-1950s, I think it's fair to say that the GMT Master was upscale, but not quite elite. This is elite. Reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. And we're back with the Rose Gold GMT by night.